In 1786, a group of veterans from the War for Independence challenged the Republican government of Massachusetts over harsh taxation and the lack of debt relief. To many, Shays Rebellion necessitated the grant of additional power to Congress. But did it really? In this video, I'll explain. In the 1770s and 1780s, a monetary crisis consumed the young United States. The disaster was sparked by the issuance of state bills of credit, paper money that rapidly depreciated in value in proportion to the volume of paper printed. In addition, the Continental Congress compounded the issue further through the printing of the paper Continental currency during the War for Independence, which had the same inflationary tendencies and became basically worthless by 1780. The rampant debasement of American money led to intense economic hardship, and Americans often struggled to get by. The inflation also made it virtually impossible to pay back debts accrued with hard money, as merchants demanded repayment in gold and silver. Though some states issued stay laws to give debtors extra time to pay their debts, or permit the repayment of debts in paper rather than hard money, these strides often alienated the merchant class and debt holders. Politicians in the early republic often had to strike a balance between policies that favored debtors and those that favored creditors. Such was the situation in Massachusetts. In the early 1780s, Governor John Hancock found himself unwilling to prosecute poor farmers who lost their land as a result of the creditors' demand for hard money. He resigned from the governorship in 1785 for health reasons, and fellow merchant James Bowdoin was elected to replace him. Bowdoin stood firm against taking the next step by introducing paper money, believing that doing so would just fan the flames of the state's economic crisis. In addition to the monetary issue, many soldiers that served in the recent war were paid in bonds that also became nearly worthless by the war's conclusion. Among them was Daniel Shays, who was wounded in action and retired only to find himself in court for the non-payment of debts owed to creditors. Shays first took part in local meetings to send petitions of grievances to the government, which went unanswered. In many parts of Massachusetts, Shays attracted followers that found themselves in a similar predicament. Peaceful protests gradually became hostile on August 29, 1786, when many dissidents in Northampton clogged a county court, preventing it from sitting. Bowdoin denounced the action, but the Massachusetts government indicted 11 protesters for disorderly and riotous sedition. Shays and Luke Day, another military officer, successfully shut down additional courts in Worcester, Barrington, Concord, and Taunton. The group even succeeded in breaking into the jail in Springfield to release imprisoned debtors and burn the barns of some civil officials. According to the eminent James Warren, Massachusetts was now in a state of anarchy and confusion bordering on a civil war. Famous Massachusetts patriots that had resisted British taxation in the decade prior, such as Samuel Adams, did not sympathize with the dissenters whatsoever. While Massachusetts patriots based their arguments on the notion that individuals could only be taxed by local representatives of the people, a Republican government had been established at that point with representatives from all regions of the state. Far from drawing parallels to the conflict with England, Adams even helped draft a riot act that would suspend habeas corpus, permitting the government to detain rebels indefinitely. Rebellion against a king may be pardoned, or lightly punished, Adams said, but the man who dares to rebel against the laws of a republic ought to suffer death. To Shays and his followers, the last straw came with the attempt to arrest the rebellious leaders. Although warrants were issued for his arrest, Shays recruited a mass of followers, which eventually numbered close to 4,000, all of which refused to pay taxes to the Massachusetts government until their grievances were addressed. Their presence was strongest in the western portion of the state, where they maintained some popular support. While serving as a diplomat in France, even the renowned Thomas Jefferson seemed to commiserate with Shays and his acolytes. "A little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical," he wrote. In another letter, Jefferson defended the spirit of resistance that characterized the movement, declaring that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. In the end, veteran of the late war Benjamin Lincoln raised a private army to confront the rebellion. Lincoln solicited the funds for the force himself and raised 3,000 militia to challenge Shays and his coadjutors. The greatest clash between armies was made at Springfield, where Shays aimed to gain control over armament stores. After the Massachusetts legislature passed a bill authorizing martial law and expanded the powers of Governor Baudouin, Shays Rebellion collapsed at Sheffield. Many of the dissidents fled to New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont, including Shays himself. In some of these locations, those that were branded traitors were even provided shelter and financial support by sympathizers. Shays and some of his top followers were convicted of treason and sentenced to death by Massachusetts, but were later pardoned. In addition, the following legislative election in Massachusetts led to a series of measures that sought to alleviate the woes of the farmers and other debtors. Shays' Rebellion greatly inspired nationalists such as Alexander Hamilton and James Madison to advocate for granting greater control over the militia to a central government. Both men argued that in dire circumstances, Congress should have the authority to intervene on behalf of the fledgling Republican states. Republicanism in America would be threatened, they felt, if the state governments remained unable to muster the militia forces necessary to deal with armed uprisings. However necessary these proposals were, they required amendments to the Articles of Confederation. Consequently, both Hamilton and Madison worked to ensure that the planned meeting to introduce new amendments would transpire as planned in May of 1787 in Philadelphia. In addition, Shays' Rebellion drew General George Washington out of retirement. If government shrinks or is unable to enforce its laws, he wrote, fresh maneuvers will be displayed by the insurgents. Anarchy and confusion must prevail, and everything will be turned topsy-turvy in that state where it is not probable the mischiefs will terminate. Although Washington repeatedly resisted pressures to enter the political realm once more, it was this incident that finally convinced him to support constitutional reform in an official capacity. More than anything else, it was his presence in the Philadelphia Convention that gave the Assembly an aura of legitimacy and necessity. At the Philadelphia Convention, several delegates made a pitch to give the general government power to organize state militia forces and the ability to send them into a state to repel insurrections. Pierce Butler urged the necessity of submitting the whole militia to the general authority, which had the care of the general defense. In similar fashion, Madison perceived the regulation of the militia naturally appertaining to the authority charged with the public defense. Charles Pinckney declared that such powers were those that could not be abused, and insisted that there was no room for such distrust of the general government. These opinions clashed with those who remained wary of transferring any military power to a general authority. For instance, Elbridge Gerry, whose own state dealt with Shays' Rebellion, argued that increased central power over the state militias was unnecessary, and that a central response to armed uprisings would create an affront to the dignity of a free state. Madison's notes record that Gerry had no such confidence in the general government to rectify situations such as the one in his state. He condemned the attempt to add such a power, professing that it would leave as black a mark as was set on Cain. In fact, Gerry earnestly believed interference by a general authority would make matters worse. While historians continue to debate the influence of Shays' Rebellion on the Philadelphia Convention and American history in general, it remains clear that the incident was one of the most pivotal events of the critical period, where the states remained in the Articles of Confederation. In the Republic, I illustrated how the product of the Philadelphia Convention discarded most of the aims of the nationalists and preserved a federalist-oriented system. If you want to pick that up, I'll include a link in the notes below. In addition, I'll also include links on the best works on Shays' Rebellion. Thank you for checking out this episode of History in a Nutshell. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos.